Without doubts, I think it's by far the best league in Europe.
How dare you score like that in the Premier League? Mission accomplished in the Premier League. The American.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fourth episode of the Premier League show, where we are previewing the last 5 teams this week, and we will give our predictions as we recap the first week of the season in our next episode. Next up, we got Nottingham Forests. A lot of people coming in. We've been talking about like some of the teams that made it to the Premier League and how they approach it. Obviously, these guys are kind of like taking it. We always talk about, either kind of being cautious, adding a couple of pieces, or blowing it up. And blowing it up by adding a lot of pieces, it is for Forest. Bickler, what do you make of all these incomings we're looking at?
I mean, there's Bournemouth, right? Those are the two transfer strategies for being a newly promoted team. You either do absolutely fucking nothing or you buy everybody. I mean, this is going to be a mixed bag, I'm sure. There's actually a lot of this I like. I think the best player that's going to end up out of this deal, honestly, somebody who's not even on there. It's somebody they added late last year in Ponzo, who was with Cooper when they won the England World Cup in 2017 for the youth teams. He looks really good this year. I think he's going to be really good on the left side for them. I think Nico will do well there. The Nigerian forward is going to be very, very interesting, right? I mean, coming out of Liverpool, we had all sorts of visa issues with him. He goes to Germany, absolutely lights it up. So let's see what happens here with him. That could be a very good pickup for them. Like, look, I actually don't hate this strategy. Like, if I'm coming into the Premier League, I would rather roll the dice and have if you're just playing the percentages, right? You'd rather have 12 transfers and have a couple of those dudes work out than do the Bournemouth thing and sit on your hands, or the Norwich thing and sit on your hands and just bounce back down to the championship again next year. So, I mean, I can't fault them for trying. It is a little bit funny when you look at 5 fullbacks and 3 center backs getting added to a list. They're not all going to work out, but I mean, it's a preferred strategy versus doing nothing.
See, I feel like there should be a happy freaking medium, though, right? I mean, what do you think, Gallia? It just feels like it's very risky to add so many pieces and expect, even though there is an improvement. I agree that, what a team like Bournemouth is doing right now is probably not the ideal scenario either, in terms of not doing anything and expecting the side that did well in Championship to kind of like duplicate it in the Premier League. Not obviously duplicate it, but at least to be able to hang around. But I think adding so many new pieces at the same time is rolling the dice in the complete opposite way, hoping somebody is going to stick. Because, when we look at this list, there's a bunch of right backs, there's a bunch of left backs. By the time you do trial and error, is it going to be too late?
Yeah, I think it is too much personally. To Paul's point, I'm right there with you. If you're going to either do Bournemouth or this, at least this shows your fans you're trying to do something to stay up and trying to improve. I'm always interested to see this team that won the playoff, because I always feel like sometimes they're the ones that were the furthest out. Forest was close to getting the second spot in the automatic promotion, but they had to win that tough playoff. And I think when you get through the playoff, you almost you're a little bit more desperate to hold your spot in the league, because I think with Fulham and Bournemouth, they earned it over 48 matches. It's a lot, or 46 matches. That's a lot of matches to acquire points to get automatic promotion. Where in the other one, it's, a one-off game and so much stress. The biggest loss is probably, we're going to talk about the losses, but they bought all these fullbacks because their best player last year might have been Jed Spence, who was on loan from Middlesbrough, who's now with Tottenham, who we'll talk about a little later tonight in the show. He offered them a lot, and I think Nico has to play a big role at creating on the right. I really like the kid they got. I think it was Darby. They got the kid, the left fullback, Tolofolo. I thought he was really good last year in the championship, and I think he could be really good for this side. I hope the ex-Liverpool striker is able to hit the ground running. He absolutely did at Union Berlin, but the Bundesliga is a different animal than the Prem. but I think he looks like he's a Premier League striker. So it's always the same with me when it comes to promoted sides. Will they score enough goals to stay up? And honestly, they don't have a Premier League recognized striker. So I think you got to see it before you can actually say for sure you know what's going to happen.
And I think also, they've added a lot of pieces. A lot of the pieces they added, actually, aside from the center forward, are mostly like, defensive. I actually worry about that a little bit more, knowing, it takes a while to kind of gel and work these people in. Bickler, does any of like the money part of it shock you, instead of, giving the Nigerian center forward Awani 22, almost 23, and then Nico 22? Are those, do the price tags shock you at all? High, low? What do you make of that?
Yeah, those are pretty high. I mean, for those players specifically, but like, I mean, and I would say historically probably not, but if you look at this window in retrospect to like what players, like what people played for top players, the fees are noticeably lower. So, but I also think as a promoted side, you're most often probably going to overpay a little bit for quality.
Yep.
So, I mean, I think that that's pretty on par with what they needed to do. I think, God, dude, I hope the rumored wages on Jesse Lingard are wrong, because like if that is true, like that's more concerning to me than paying for a 21-year-old striker. You know what I mean? Like, and like, look, I think Jesse Lingard's probably paying for quality, and I get that. But I also think that anyone that goes by Jay Lings on an unveiling shirt at 30 years old probably has some other question marks aside on there.
And I think that's the thing. If you're bringing Jesse Lingard, especially in those wages, I mean, you are kind of paying for the experience, right? And I would think you're kind of expecting a leadership role in some form or fashion when you bring in a player like that. I'm not sure if Jesse is that person, especially after kind of like going around. He even came here, like talked to a couple of Major League Soccer teams and stuff. I think that was kind of like, more like agent work than anything else, probably. I was personally shocked that, he did not get moved last January. And we kind of like talked about this when we were doing the preview for Manchester United. But I think that's Manchester United's fault for not getting something for him. And then, they didn't even play him the second half of the season much. So it was kind of like, why did you guys even keep him? I mean, what do you think of that move along, Gally? I personally don't see him as a guy who's going to provide leadership. Leadership does not come with age, if they're just looking at age and how many years he's been in the league.
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking for leadership from Jesse Lingard, all you need is like one quick scroll through Twitter, his Instagram, and his TikTok accounts, and you will know that Jesse Lingard is not leading anything except for a guy's trip to South Beach. So that's his mentality. That's his personality. Now, I think that's part of what they bought, though. I mean, they're hoping they get the Jesse Lingard that showed up at West Ham and played like a player that was a different, honestly, to be fair, he played at that time like a different quality than anyone else at West Ham, and he made everyone around him better. And I think they see him as playing in the attacking number 10 role because, to my point earlier, I think their struggle will be scoring goals. And they believe that if they get themselves a creative midfielder that has proven that they can make, serviceable to really good Premier League players even better by giving a little bit of guile, a little bit of difference. And, he's not Christian Eriksen by any stretch of the imagination, but I think they saw what Brentford got out of Eriksen last year in Lingard. So they overpaid. They invested a little heavy because they wanted to bring in a player that the young players on this side knew at least was a part of a big club and has been a Premier League fixture, because he has been in the Premier League for 13 years as a first-team player at United. Now, the fact he never made it with 4 different managers speaks enough about his character to me to probably let you know there's something wrong there. This is a gamble for Forest. I think it could pay off for him if he's good. But if I were a betting man, and I am, I wouldn't bet on this being a smashing success. I'd bet on him maybe playing in MLS someday soon. And not.
I mean, the fact that they got him on a free transfer, kind of you can say, okay, they went heavy on the wages because they did not pay like a transfer for him. They got him on a free transfer. So I'm not as concerned with that. I mean, you gave the example of Ericsson, for example, at Brentford, and I think that's where we kind of could change it, because I do not see Lingard in that caliber. And I know what you mean in terms of West Ham, but when you look at West Ham, that team, he had a lot of people around him to make better. And I think it's the same scenario for Ericsson, where he had some pieces over there around him. Does he have those players around him here, Bickler, to bring the impact that, Galley's saying that they are definitely, hopefully counting on? Well, Galley's betting against it, but sounds like Forest is betting for it. Where do you bet? You are a betting man yourself.
Yeah, I think they're different scenarios. Like I get the comparison. I do think that Brentford was in a situation where you've got a squad full of, you've got a tactical identity, you've got a squad full of Danish internationals, and then you're bringing in the Danish captain of their international team. So I think it's a different scenario. I mean, it could work. I mean, maybe he does come in and start scoring goals from the 10 spot, and we all look stupid, right? I mean, I think that's definitely a calculated risk on their part. I just personally think he's a bit of a knucklehead, and I don't know. Like I just don't know, with that many young players around you in a new league, in a promoted side, if that's the move you want to make. And I guess there's only one way to find out, and let's just play the matches, and we're going to find out. But we'll see. I think it's going to be interesting, right? Are they going to pull a Brentford? Are they going to come out and it's going to take teams a couple months to adjust to the way that they play? I don't know if they've necessarily got that firepower, but I mean, we gotta like call a spade and at least acknowledge the fact that Nottingham, for the last half of last year in the championship, was the best side in the championship, top to bottom. And so we do have to give them that respect, and we'll see what happens.
What do you think will happen then? I mean, as we look at kind of the outgoings, what do you forecast for them? Where they end this season?
I think they got enough to stay up. I think they've got enough in the tank. I think that they'll hit in that I think they'll be in that 14 to relegation fighting spots. I think they'll be in a relegation fight. I think they will escape at the end of the day.
How about you, Galley? Do these moves work, or where does Nottingham Forest end up at the end of the season?
So I'm gonna, if I give you my statement of my heart, they stay up, because to Paul's point, I watched a lot of them down the stretch, and they were really, really fun. And I think Cooper's a good manager that could be building something really great there. I fear that too many changes might allow them to get off to a slow start. And I think a slow start for teams that get promoted can then lead them into being in a relegation battle way too early for young players to be able to get out of. And we talk about the fact, I actually read somewhere that they're going to give Jesse Lingard the captain's armband, which is purely just because of the club he played at one day. I hope that's not true, because that would be a huge, huge mistake, because he can be your best player. It doesn't have to be your leader. And I think that's where I fear for them. Like, their coach, their manager is their leader, and he helped drag them, into the championship playoff and then to the final and winning it. So I want them to stay up. I think if I were betting with my wallet, I'd probably bet on them to finish probably 18th and just miss out on a second year in the Premier League. But I honestly hope I'm wrong, because Forest is a big, big club, and the Premier League will be better if they become a fixture in it again.
So we won't move on to Southampton and see what they did first. Galley, I will want to start with you on this one. They do make some moves, nothing too over the top in terms of money spent, but there are some pieces added in there. How do you think this will change Southampton this season compared to last?
Well, first off, I really like the move for Gavin Bazunu. He was on loan last year. He has huge upside. He's basically in competition with Kelleher, Cayman Kelleher, to be the starting goalkeeper for the Irish international team. Southampton made this move because they thought that they needed to improve. Obviously, they had McCarthy lost his job to Fraser Forster down the stretch last year. Forster's moved on to become the backup at Tottenham. So I think that's a great move for them to get a young international level keeper who is definitely one of the hotter names in Europe on the rise. So I think that's a really, really great move. I think Romeo Lavia, the young defensive midfielder from Man City, who just couldn't sniff his way into Pep's side, but has a lot of really good upside as well. I think that could be a surprisingly great move because, Oriol Romeo is really getting old and he's getting up in age, but Southampton really struggles when he's not on the pitch from a defensive standpoint. And I think they need it to improve in that area. So they get a little stronger in the midfield. They get a better keeper, but it's still Southampton. Again, I come back like a broken record. I question whether or not they're going to score enough goals. And I question whether or not Ralph Hasenhüttl won't have 2 or 3 7-9-0 losses that seem to just kind of derail them, and they go on these long, barren stretches without points. So I don't see a lot of positives coming out of this window for Southampton.
What do you allude that to, Bickler? Like some of those like big losses, because Gabby's right. It's almost like they're due once a season to do that. Is it just the style, or like once it gets loose,
that's
it just
not a
goes
style.
downhill?
I think that's just a straight up. I think that's a mentality. I think they've got the mentality that they're going to hang in and try to get points, and if they feel like they're not going to get points, they fold up shop. So I mean, I think that's a pretty legitimate criticism of the manager when you've got a team that is prone to that. So here's the interesting thing about this window for me. I actually love the players. I hate the strategy. I think that if you look at those top 4 on that list, you talk about the French striker, 19 years old, the German international center back, Romeo Lavia that Gally got into, and Bazunu. Those 4 players were considered towards the top now or in very, very recent time of their respective positions as prospects. All 4 of those were considered essentially blue chippers. And I love those players because of their tremendous upside. All 4 of them have the potential to be elite or world-class in their respective positions. The problem I have with it is that doesn't answer your immediate need now for those 4 players. Like, this is a side that needs veteran leadership and stability now, especially across the back line. And that doesn't do it for you. And to me, this is a transfer strategy built for a year in the championship, which if you're a Southampton supporter, you cannot love.
So I'm kind of like torn on this one because I see these moves and I agree with what you're saying in terms of like investing in youth. I just worry about, how fast that will happen and the situation they were in. It's not a team that was as confident, as comfortable, I guess I should say. Confident is not the right word. As comfortable in, Premier League last year. So I felt like they needed a few key pieces that really did not get added. I mean, when you look at people who left, I don't think there's anything that is very concerning. Shane Long is finally has left the building after like 18 decades or so, but aside from like, you don't see any big losses. I just don't know, did they do enough to improve to be comfortable this season in Premier League? I mean, I don't think any of us see them like making a run for like a European spot or anything like that, but do you think they've improved enough where they can be comfortable?
No, I think this side is absolutely targeted to be in the relegation battle. I think they are this year's Leeds. They could really take like 4 or 5 steps back in the table, and I think that will prove harder and harder for them. And to Paul's point, we talked about the mentality of the big losses, and it always amazed me that the manager has survived 2 7-0s and a 9-0 defeat, all at home. Like, so on one level, it made me think like maybe these guys really believe in this manager and the leadership believes in it and the right guy is there. But I don't know that he's a guy that's going to get them out of tough struggles. So I could see them struggling early, not scoring goals, not having guys fit in, and ultimately ending up making like the break glass, hire Sam Allardyce type of move. And I just don't think those relegation specialists work anymore in today's game with the tactics and the way the players operate. And I just think Southampton's in for a really, really tough year. And, I don't want all three teams that came up to go back down. And if you ask me right now, what existing Premier League team has the best chance to go down from last season, I would tell you it's Southampton.
So that's an interesting point, Bickler, that, despite those losses, they hung on to their manager. And you could kind of, I love playing devil's advocate. You could always say, hey, we've had this in the past. The team plays for him and they bounce back. We've bounced back in the past after a loss like that. And they have. I mean, sometimes, the form might go down, but in the long run, I think it's hard to deny that the players play for him. What do you think? I mean, what do you think the mindset is then? So I guess the good thing is when a loss like that happens, you don't need to press the panic button because you can be like, been there, done that. We got in like our butt kicked before. But at the same time, when it happens repeatedly, kind of like what you were talking about earlier, you have to put it a little bit on the manager in terms of the mentality that the team has.
Yeah, and I do. I think the Southampton brass is probably looking for a fresh start with a healthy squad to see if they can pull out of a nosedive. And I just feel like Southampton has been a team with its chin above water for a long time, trending in the wrong direction. If you look at last year, they finished the last 6 without a win. I think they lost their last 4. I just think it's trending down. And like I said, this transfer window to me is not encouraging. And it's kind of funny because I actually really, really do like their additions. I just think they're not additions that they're not additions that are going to help them immediately. And I think my major worry for the players themselves is I don't necessarily know that this is a squad where those players go in and develop to their best of ability right now. And that's the real concerning thing. But I mean, like I said, it's almost like these are players that can bet in and do really well and make you a lot of money if you're in the championship. And so like, that's where I look at this and I'm like, these are like signings. Like if I'm looking for players that I can bring in and sell off for a lot of money in the future, these are players I bring in for that. But like, that's not what you want to hear as a Southampton fan, a Southampton supporter. That's not what you want to hear. I think I'm in agreement with Gally personally. I think that like I say dark horse. I don't even think they're a dark horse, but they're my team that I put in the relegation out of the top 3. They're absolutely the side that if I had to choose, it would be a side that I could see going down next year.
Yeah, I see a battle as well. I think like some of these guys, to your guys' point, if they walked into a squad, if they were added onto a team like West Ham or Villa or somewhere like that, one at a time or even like 2 at a time, I think it would be like give them a reason and an environment to like, improve in and have time to have their impact and stuff like that. I just don't know if Southampton provides that scenario for them. So having said that, sounds like pessimistic all around. But Gally, let's start with you in terms of predictions for Southampton. Where do you see them ending up?
They will not finish between 9th and 12th because that's where I have every other club in this whole entire division finishing.
We can cross that off. Yeah.
I'm gonna throw it out. I'm gonna throw it out right now. I have them finishing 18th and being relegated. Southampton's run in the Premier League ends. And the folks at St. Mary's and on the South Coast do not have a problem because they'll get to have their derby next year with Bournemouth in the championship.
How about you, Bickler? I have a tough time kind of keeping them out as well. As I look at the other teams, I'm trying to predict, which team they would do better at. I have them like 17, 18 fighting that battle. If anything, as far as I'm concerned, if anything saves them, it's the experience of being in the Premier League and having players who, like battled similar battles in the past and know the Premier League and have that experience. But aside from that, I agree that it's going to be a tough battle for them. Where do you have them?
Yeah, I don't want to sound like an echo chamber, and we love to disagree on here, but I think they're going to get relegated. I just don't see a situation where their defense improves, and I don't see a situation where they get enough free kicks to put James Ward-Prowse over the top and like get a goal.
Yeah, it relies a lot on him, unfortunately. So I know Southampton fans will not like hearing this, but I think we have a tough season. We're predicting a tough season ahead for them with possible relegation. So let's talk about Tottenham. A lot of moves in the offseason. They did spend some money, bringing in a lot of new faces. And I have a lot of respect for Conte in terms of like getting the most out of his team. We kind of saw his impact right away when he took over. And he kind of like, he's the kind of guy to me who has a plan, who has a method, and he's going to stick to it. I think he's a much better version of Mourinho, if you will. Like he's might be set in his ways, but I think he can kind of work with his players, connect with his players, and actually make a team. And I think that's why it's important that this offseason, the additions they brought to kind of complete that picture that he's trying to build over there. Bickler, let's start with you on this one. What do you make of their window? Let's start with the incomings.
Yeah, so I mean, if I look at incomings, I say like, we take this sort of identity that Conte has given the side, and we talk about how all good Premier League sides sort of really find their identity. And that's what he did with Tottenham last year. And these signings to me are sort of like fit the mold of that identity. I think Basuma is going to be another piece that they have to play with them. But Don Bailey moving out, that gives them sort of a like for like swap with another piece at a really, really good price. Carlson, and we talked about like if he's not on your side, you hate him. But I think if he's on your side, you really like him because I mean, let's face it, like Kane's not going to bully anyone. I really think like Son's just going to he's going to pick you up and give you a hug if he knocks you over. He's like the nicest dude ever. I think Carlson gives you a little bit of like steel that you probably need in that side. So that's a lot of money for him. But I mean, I think those are good pieces when we look at incomings. And, give Tottenham credit. I give Conte credit. Like when we were talking last year, we were talking about how it was going to be a battle between them and Arsenal for that 5th spot. And now we're at a spot and we're at a point where like Tottenham looks poised to overtake Chelsea for that 3 spot in the league quite easily.
Yeah, I want to talk about like the price tag. So I'm glad you kind of brought that up because Bissouma, I mean, he could probably have gone for more if it wasn't for some of the legal troubles and stuff like that. Probably affected his value, I would think. I know it almost felt like because he was rumored with Liverpool for a while as well, and I just feel like his price tag kind of like went in a lot lower than I thought he would be. So I guess you could look at it as a steal as well. But are you shocked, Gally, in the amount of money spent on our buddy Richarlison over here, who is in my top 5 of annoying players, mostly for reasons Bickler probably stated, but either way, he's like towards the top of that list. But are you shocked with like the price tag that they spent on him?
I am a little shocked. I think if you look at this list of players, I think you have to maybe be most shocked that Daniel Levy pulled this off. Daniel Levy gets criticized often for not spending money and not supporting the club and balancing the books. They built a beautiful stadium and didn't fill it with beautiful players, as Mourinho basically said last year when he was there. I think Conte changed everything at that club. I think he rebuilt it. He invigorated them. He created a presence that they could win, and they pushed on and they fought for him. And I mean, you see it here. Richarlison is a Conte player all day. I mean, the guy once said Diego Costa is one of my favorite strikers because I'd be afraid to meet him in an alley. And that is like Antonio Conte at their finest. Like, I want a striker who I'm afraid to meet in a dark alley. And let me tell you, if you met Richarlison in a dark alley, you'd probably be buried under the alley when it ended. So I think Richarlison is going to do just fine with Antonio Conte. And I really, really like the Lenglet buy. Like, I think that the free loan from Barcelona, I think he's a class center back. I think he didn't fit in with Barcelona's system. And I think when you play in a back 3 for Conte, you understand your job, and wing backs are so important. And then he goes and grabs Perisic. He's already talking about playing Lucas Moura as a wingback in the Premier League because he's like, I made Victor Moses a first-team Premier League player of the year, and he was a winger that went out on loan 4 times at his club. Like, I can do this with anyone because my system makes good players play great. And they still have stars, you know, and I think Richarlison adds to those stars. I don't know if he's a starter because I think what we don't count on that screen is Betancourt and Kulusevski as loans that became permanent buys in the summer. Because to me, those are two more additions to this window that make it even more impressive. And they're guys who, like we say with Luis Diaz as Liverpool supporters, already had a half a season to bet into the process, into the philosophy. So we'll get to our predictions later, but I'm a little bullish on Tottenham. I think they're making a big jump. I'm with Paul. They've jumped Arsenal. They've jumped United. They've jumped Chelsea on actual talent, let alone the fact I think they have the better manager and a better cohesive side.
I think it's just a better direction overall right now. I think it would be different maybe like a year or so ago in terms of like how I would evaluate it, but I feel like, they know where they're going. There's kind of like a direction and leadership on that team now that's centralized around Conte, which is, going to be, I think, key to their success as well. Because I have them, I know it's like jumping ahead for predictions, but I have them as third as well over like Chelsea this season, right behind City and Liverpool, but battling for the top spot. So Bickler, Gally was talking about Richarlison perhaps not starting there, which I can also see. Who do you see starting over there up top with, especially like the season that Kulusevski had coming over? I mean, the impact he had, it would be hard to bench him, but then you don't spend 65 million and sit him on the bench to stay in City.
Well, they might.
Yeah. I mean, I think they could be stockpiling depth, although that's expensive, but I mean, you could also see them do a situation where they push Kane forward instead of him playing almost further in like a false nine, like they tend to do with Harry Kane. They could push him forward and have Son in like a free roll 10. They could play around with that. Son does do very well when he's up in that sort of central area. So they have a couple of options there. I can tell you what, they're not going to spend that kind of money and then worry about who plays where. They're going to be very happy that they have those options.
Yep.
So if you look for a weakness or a concern for Spurs, Gally, where is that?
Oh, it's the wing backs. And the reason I say that is they spent 17 million on Jed Spence, and I think he could be a really, really good signing for the future. But didn't we talk about this? Well, if we had this show 3 years ago, we would have talked about this when they signed Ryan Sessegnon from Fulham, and we would have said, oh, wow, they got this best left young fullback and player of the future. And what I really like about Conte is he recognizes when players aren't his quickly, because he like told Emerson Royal and Serge Reguilon and Mbale and Lo Celso, they were like, yeah, you don't even have to come on the away on the foreign trip for preseason. We'd rather you stay here in London and find a new club to play for, because you just take up space. I'd rather take kids with me than Serge Reguilon, who's a guy who started the last international competitive match for Spain. So he just realizes players aren't in his fit. I think it's the wingbacks, because to me, Conte's whole system predicates around the wingbacks performing at a high level. So it's Doherty and it's Perisic. And Perisic is an old guy coming to the Premier League who hasn't played a lot of minutes in the preseason. And I hope it's a really good move for them, because he was really good at Inter, and at times he plays like a right wing. But I really think it's their wingbacks in that system. And honestly, it's crazy to say this, it's Eric Dyer, because he's going to be the central linchpin in the middle of the defense. And Conte's talked about how much he loves him, how much he's the leader of the team and the leader of the defense. So I think it's Eric Dyer could be like quietly the most important piece to Tottenham actually making a big step forward, because they're going to win this year by scoring some goals, but having a great, great defensive core, because that's how Conte wins things. And he wins a lot.
Eric Dyer is a puzzle, isn't he? Like, he does, regardless of who goes there. So he must be doing something not only on the pitch, but behind the scenes as well. The way he carries himself and, like the way he leads, that regardless of which manager comes there, they always value Dyer and, make a spot for him. Either way, like here or there, they try to fit him in. What is your concern with Spurs, Bickler? If you had picked one weak spot that you could be like, this could be their undoing? Because we talked about, I think they've solved the depth, especially midfield and moving forward. My concern was like depth in defense, but let me ask yours.
Yeah, to me, I don't think they have the sort of like the solidity, the consistent, solid foundation in midfield yet. Like I don't think that that's necessarily been sort of ironed out for them. And I think, they're an interesting side where they seem to win games without necessarily winning the possession battle. And I think a lot of that comes down to Conte's ability to defend and in the quality that they have up front. I think for them to get consistently and to build upon that, they're going to have to start winning more games from the midfield. And I don't necessarily know that I see that yet. Like I still have serious question marks about Bissouma, and I have serious question marks how they didn't get more out of Dembele out, because I think that he's a phenomenal talent. And they brought him in from League One as a French sensation, and they just could never get it to work. And so I think that's where I'm going to be really watching this year, is sort of the heart of that midfield.
So I mean, that's a good question. I mean, what do you think, Gally, in terms of that Bissouma versus Ndombele? Kind of like, what is Conte seeing in Bissouma that he did not see in Ndombele?
I honestly believe he sees a player who's proven he can take the physical rigors of playing in the Premier League. And I think that's probably what didn't work for Ndombele the most. He also had 4 different managers, if you count, the 5 weeks that Ryan Mason was the caretaker manager there. I mean, he played for a lot of different people. It didn't work. I think he was asked to do a lot of different things in different systems that never any one of them fit him. Had he gone to the right fit in the Premier League? Do I think he could play in the Premier League? Yes. Do I think he likes the physical nature of England? I don't. And I think Bissouma's proven he can play in the rigors of the Premier League. It'll be interesting to me to what they'll do with like the Betancourt, Højbjerg, Bissouma midfield and what that will look like. Will they play with a 2? Will they play with a 3? I think that's really the biggest area of the pitch. But if you want me to tell you my biggest question, is Hugo Lloris still at a level to keep Tottenham competing at the top end of the Premier League? Because I've seen like small cracks, small mistakes. He's getting a little bit older. I mean, he's almost 40 years old. I know he's still France's number 1, but it looks like he might be passing that torch even before the World Cup. So it'll be interesting to see there. I would question, they've improved their defense with Lenglet. We talked about Dyer, and I think Romero was one of the best buys in the entire Premier League last year. I think the kid is going to be an absolute stud, and within 5 years, he will be playing at a much, much bigger club than Tottenham, or Conte will still be there, and Tottenham will be a big, big club, and Romero will be a big reason why. I question whether or not they shouldn't have strengthened that keeper and not bought a backup. I feel like they should have bought someone to actually push Lloris and not a Forster who was just taking a payday and a new flat in London.
Yeah, I think it's just more like to have some experience, that which I can see as well, because I mean it is in that sense Forster does provide that. So prediction time, I think we already spilled the beans early on anyway when we were talking about him, but where do you have him, Gally?
I actually have them third, guys, and if I was making a bullish prediction, they're the only side in the Premier League that even has a puncher's chance to talk about dancing their way into the title picture. And it would take injuries, it would take a drop-off. But even if City and Liverpool hit the heights they have, I believe Spurs have bridged the gap a little bit to those two juggernauts. And if it was 18 points last year that third place was behind the leader, I believe I wouldn't be shocked at all if it was 7-8 points this year and Spurs fall 8-9 points off the chance of winning the title. And if Conte stays there 5 years, Spurs will have the greatest chance they've ever had to pick up a Premier League title. It's what the guy does. I
just don't see him staying that long, I guess, because that's not what he does usually either. So maybe that's why. But I hear what you're saying. I think a lot of the confidence that I know I have, and sounds like you guys as well, is because of who's in charge. So the people coming in, and we say this, as Liverpool fans, we say this for Liverpool all the time. After a certain time, you just have confidence when somebody is signed that there is a plan and they're going to fit into that system, given the benefit of the doubt. And I feel like Conte kind of gets that. I have them third as well. Bickler, where do you have them?
Yeah, I'm bullish too. I think they're third, and I think they're closing the gap on second.
I believe so too. I mean, definitely would not be like you're saying, Gally. I do not see the point difference being that high, and they're the team that could make that run and get it closer and closer. But we do still have them as third, finishing this season. Next up, we got West Ham, and that was a surprise team last year. David Moyes really got him playing. We have the president of the Bowen fan club and the co-presidents, both of you guys over here. I don't know. You guys can fight amongst yourselves. Who's the president? Who's the co-president?
I always liked him.
Whoa. There is no fighting over anything. There was one person who loved, one man who hated, and one man who acquiesced to being effing wrong by about December. Then by about May was like, I wasn't just wrong. I was really fucking wrong.
So
and that guy
let's start with you,
got the
Gally.
Burger King
While we look at who they've added in the off season, and they did spend some money actually, like bringing some people on. What do you think in terms of like the incomings and how it will change? Will it improve West Ham?
I absolutely love it. I think West Ham had one of the best windows of any team. The players, it's all a question of whether or not they sit and they fit, right? But David Moyes plays with a small squad. Arguably making it to the semifinals of the Europa League was the biggest detriment in them trying to challenge to qualify for the Champions League, because he literally rolled out the same 11 players on Sunday, Thursday for the entire season. And by the end of the year, it looked it. And they were leggy and they were tired. Scamacca is a really, really, really good Italian talent. Sassuolo played an attack-minded game. I actually think he will be their central number 9 striker. I think he will take Antonio's job, and it won't take long. He's come in late, but I think he will have that job. He's more of a clinical goal scorer than Antonio is, clearly, as a guy who came up as a fullback and then worked his way as a winger, and then, as a midfielder. Aguerd might be the most important signing they made, because they needed a center back. They needed people to play. I mean, when you're trotting out Craig Dawson and Kurt Zuma every week and you have no other depth and you want to play 3 at the back at times, depending on your competition, he's a really, really talented player, and there were a lot of big clubs in for him. And then lastly, the championship player Downs they bought is basically the guy they are the most bullish and excited about. He's a young English talent. He's an attack-minded midfielder, and I really think they found a diamond in a rough. And I think he's going to play a big role kind of in that Lanzini impact substitute. And it'll just be interesting to see from a leadership standpoint how much they miss Mark Noble, because he didn't play a lot, but from all account, he still ran everything at the club from top down, from training sessions to the dressing room, to helping, Declan Rice be a better leader by being there as a grown-ass man. And I think that's what you need when you're a club just under the talent level and punching above your weight. But I like West Ham. I like what they do. I like how they play. And if you haven't heard this before, I like me some Jared Bowen.
Yes, you guys do. I mean, not that I hate Jared Bowen, but goddamn, you guys are huge fans. Okay, so Bickler, let's come to you. I mean, they have a solid team. They already did. And, it's one of the teams that I actually really enjoyed watching last year. And they've added some pieces. And really, they did not lose anything significant at all, like as we look at like the outgoings now. I guess the key is the people who brought in, are you as bullish on them as Gally is? Or are they just basically going to be depth more than anything else?
No, I mean, I like them. I think they fit a mold, right? And I'm probably going to say something that West Ham supporters will hate, and just bear with me. But I think when I see this side, I think this is like, yeah, get excited, Timucin. I think this is the blueprint for this West Ham team is what I always thought Burnley should be. They're big, they're physical, they're blue collar, but they play football, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that last part is the part that Burnley never got, the football part. And I think, like, to me, like, Souček's the heart of that, right? That's exactly what you want. This big, tough, like just blue collar dude that will grab it by the scruff of the neck and drag it through the mud. And I think these signings fit that. Unfortunately, the Moroccan center back is already injured and he's going to have ankle surgery. So who knows how long that's going to happen. And that just seems like variations on a theme for them from center back, considering the fact that last year they were pulling a vintage January Liverpool and playing midfielders at center back. And so, I mean, they'll definitely want that to improve and improve quickly. Samaka, dude's 6'5", man. Like, the kid is huge. Like, so, like, if he's got any sort of footballing nuance to him, he's going to be a handful. It'll be real interesting to see what he brings. All reports from them are that he hasn't been playing preseason, but he has been training, and apparently he's just been knocking the net off the frame. So, like, it's going to be real interesting to see what happens with him. Yeah, I like the window in terms of just solidifying. I still think they need a little bit more depth in the back. I think they need more center back depth. I think that still needs to be addressed. But, yeah, I'm bullish on West Ham. I like the way they play. And Jan Bone, he's pretty ace.
Do you think the kid replaces Antonio as well?
I think eventually. I think it'll probably happen pretty quickly too, just because Antonio is not durable.
So, well, I think that kind of like lets them use a different, because I mean, the dude is a beast and relies a lot on like the physical play. So I think, making the signing kind of helps them in that sense where you have two of those guys. So you can kind of alternate them and not rely on, beat Antonio to death, because it has to be tricky. I mean, you as a center back, you probably, he would just put me in his pocket, but as a center back, you probably do not enjoy playing against a guy like Antonio, because that's the kind of guy that's gonna, require ice bath for you after the game. It's just the way he plays, and he's not like just a big dude. He's a big dude who plays hard, and I think that's kind of like very tough to play against. I know, like whenever we play against him at Liverpool, it's always like a concern of mine. He might not be the best finisher, and sometimes doesn't have the best decision making, but in terms of like the physical battle and the toll he's going to put on center backs is always concerning. So let me ask you this then, Gali, because you talked about, the run they made last year in the Europa, and they're going to be in there again. Do you think they've added enough depth where that is not going to hurt them this year? Because I would think, the way they play kind of suits that, especially once they get to the, like home and away things. The way they play suits them to keep advancing.
So they're in the Europa Conference, not the Europa League, because they finished 7th last year. They fell one spot out of the Europa League. So they'll be playing in the Europa Conference, if I'm not mistaken, as the English representative. I do believe that it is ingrained in David Moyes' nature to play the best players he has, because he's never been used to having a squad big enough, and he wants to win every match. Because as much as I dislike him as the ex-Everton guy and the United guy, you have to kind of respect the fact that he was the manager of this club, kept him out of relegation, and they fired him the next year to hire a former Champions League winner that they then had to fire to hire like 3 more guys to realize the mistake was ever letting David Moyes go. And then he's moved him 11 spots up the table out of saved him from relegation and brought him to a European semifinal where they it's downright impressive what David Moyes has done. And 3 years ago, they had supporters running on the pitch during matches to try to get ownership to sell the team at the London Stadium. And in turn, they turned that awful bowl of an arena into like a home fortress that actually their supporters have given them a great lift. So I think what West Ham's doing is really special. And I think it's what makes this league special is if you get the right manager with the right group of guys, and then you have a couple diamonds in the rough, like a Jared Bowen. Like we all said, he could be talented. He came out of Hull City. But you have to talk about it, Timucin. His statistics last year put him at the level of the best right wing in the world. Like he's the first, in my opinion, he's the first name on Derek Southgate's team sheet for the England team. Right now is Jared Bowen on true form over like 18 months. Scores goals, creates assists, works hard, presses. He does everything you need. And on top of it, he gets paid less than like 11 of his teammates because he signed a shitty contract out of Hull City as a transfer from a relegated side. So I genuinely think like they have something special being built there. And it seems like a working class club with a working class manager for working class supporters. And I think if I were a West Ham supporter right now, I'd be pretty bullish about where we're at as a club and where we're going.
So they are going to be in the Europa Conference. Does that help them, Bickler, in some ways? Because I know what Gally is saying, but like in terms of like starting the best 11 and stuff, but I mean, seeing some of the opposition that they will face there, because Europa, you still get a lot of quality teams, but not as much in conference. Will that let him basically maybe rotate more, give youth more tries and like playing time, and kind of save some legs? Because that's where they ran out last year.
I mean, I think they're going to have to. I don't think they're going to have a choice. I think they're going to have to. So yeah, I mean, and then maybe this is a team that very much benefits from 5 subs. We talk about how we don't think that's going to have a huge impact. It might for a club like West Ham. So yeah, I think they're going to have to rotate. I'm bullish on them too. I mean, I think they're a team that has the capability. We talked about the things that can go wrong for Arsenal. We talked about the things that can go wrong for Manchester United. I don't think that they're going to catch Chelsea, even if there's an implosion. But if there's an implosion and things go really far south for Manchester United or for Arsenal, West Ham, I think, could catch those teams. I think they could be there.
So you threw out. So you're saying like sixth? There's 6th or 7th is where you're seeing them.
Yeah, I think they could go as high as 5th. Like, I think if the scenario's right, and I think that if United struggles, and I think that Arsenal struggles at the same time, I think if both those clubs struggle, I think West Ham could go as high as 5th. I think they'll probably finish in that 6th, 7th spot.
I think one thing is probably going to be the fact that those players are going to have that experience of being, juggling European games, midweek games along the Premier League games, whereas most of that squad probably was not used to that before. So I think they will have that experience. I'm actually pretty bullish on them too. I don't know about 5th, but I do feel like they will be 6th this year. And I don't see them like coming into the top 4 because we were talking about earlier in our show, talking about like Tottenham and stuff like that. And I just don't see them going up that high, but I do see them moving up one more spots, taking advantage of, I'm guessing like a United disaster personally, but being 6th. How do you have them finishing, Gally?
So if I were making a bet on long odds, I would of a team to crash the top 4, they would absolutely be the side that I would place my money on. To Paul's point, it takes a perfect storm. It takes Arsenal having probably some injuries. It probably takes Tuchel stepping down or leaving Chelsea and them just kind of having a month of rebuilding. And it takes, nothing working right for United, which, well, won't hurt anyone on this podcast to hear that, or on this show to hear that said, right? I don't think that will happen. I think they will probably finish 6th or 7th. I mean, picking them ahead of United or Arsenal to start a season and when both are having good preseasons is kind of hard for me to do on paper, just with the talent that they have. But I think, again, that they have the consistency of a manager that plays a style that suits his talent. And I don't know that either of those other 3 managers right now, with Tuchel, Arteta, or Ten Hag, can actually play their style with the talent they have to its highest level. And I think West Ham can. So I think if all things right, they could finish 5th, maybe 4th, maybe 6th. Either way, West Ham went into most seasons thinking they might be relegated for the last decade or playing the championship next year. The idea that they're at the point they are is really a testament to the ownership for believing in David Moyes and David Moyes for believing in his players.
We are at our last team of previews over here, gentlemen, and it is the Wolves. There's a lot of movements in some ways. There was a lot of loans. There's a lot of players from Portugal. Let's go with you, Gally, and start with them. They had kind of like a weird season last year. in terms of sometimes you thought, they were going to go downhill. Sometimes they had like a good run going. It was kind of like up and down. I wouldn't say the more consistent. They were never in danger or anything like that. But where do you see them after the changes, like the incomings and outgoings now? Which direction do you see them going?
Neutral. I mean, honestly, I think they're stuck in neutral, and I think they have been for a couple of years. I think Bruno Lage actually did a great job last year. He came into the league. People kind of joked about his pedigree and what he had done. He was 1 year Benfica's top manager, and he was the Benfica 2 manager for a year. And he gets this big job, and you're like, well, he was qualified. He speaks Portuguese. And he really had an identity, though, that helped them, even though I thought their defensive stability was weakened because, Boley didn't play. They were down a few players. You lose Jimenez all year. It was a horrific injury that Jimenez went through when he had the collision with David Luiz. And, hitting heads with anyone would be terrible. Hitting heads with David Luiz is probably like the worst thing that could happen to a human because you come out of your stew and David Luiz is looking over at you with that crazy ass hair. It probably was something as crazy as knowing that your skull was cracked in 4 different places. He doesn't look like the same footballer. And he's hurt again. And and to me, that's a huge loss for them. I love the Pedro Neto coming back. I like some of the signings that they've made, but I don't really know that they've done enough work right now to improve. And I just look back at that first and second years in the Premier League under Nuno and think, I know it wasn't going well, but you had an identity and you had players that played to a system and a manager who also spoke Portuguese. So therefore, he was qualified to stick around maybe a little longer. And I think they pulled the plug too early, and I think the project has been set back a long way because of it.
What do you think, Bickler?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Galliot. They're stuck in neutral. I think that when I look at them, I think like Cody and Neves is the start to a nice spine. But I think so much of their identity in the past has been wrapped up in Jimenez and the fact that he's hurt again and doesn't look anywhere near the player he was pre-injury last year. Like, I think that they're going to have to find another identity moving forward. Outside of the bottom 3 teams that got relegated, they had the worst expected goal differential or expected goal output of any of the sides. So they're just, not only do they not look necessarily great going forward, they're just not even getting anything on frame right now consistently. So they've got to figure out what they want that thing to look like defensively. Offensively. Defensively, they've always been fairly sound. They had moments last year where they struggled, but I think that was mostly through injury. So, yeah, they've got to really sort out the offensive side of things if they're going to sort of improve upon last year and get back into that mid-table. Otherwise, I think they are really going to struggle this year.
Is it a matter of not being able to replace some of the players they lost? Or, I mean, why do you think where the inconsistency comes from, Yali?
Well, I mean, they got Adama Traore back, so just talk about inconsistency on inconsistency. I mean, you want to talk about a guy who's inconsistent. He's just consistently fast, and everything else is, 50-50.
And
right? I mean, it's
shiny.
Yeah. Oh, he's shiny, all right. I mean, and again, if I had arms like that, I'd show him off. Because I have arms like I do, I keep them out of the screen. But, it's one of these things when it comes to Traore, when it comes to that side, they need goals, right? Like Paul mentioned Neves. They still roll out João Moutinho, classy player, technical.
45.
He's 155, like literally. Like, it's ridiculous. I think he was 45 when he was at Monaco. Like, it doesn't make any sense. And at the same time, they need him to play because they don't strengthen in these areas. And then when they spend money, right? They go and sign last year Fabio Silva. They buy this, record signing, young 19-year-old striker from Benfica. Maybe they should have bought the guy with the last name Nunez. Instead, they bought a guy who played on the youth team and had never scored a professional goal. And then we're surprised when he couldn't score professional goals in the toughest league in the world. And the kid's been loaned out, I think, to either the Dutch or it might even be like a lesser league than that.
I think it was Belgium. Was it?
The Jupiler League?
Like,
Anderlecht, yes, Belgium.
and this might be great for the club, right? He might get the experience he needs. He might play. They bought Huang, and then they made that signing permanent. Looked like a little bit of breath of fresh air. But you spend all that money on a young kid, and you send him out on loan in his second season at your club after having a failed first season. And it feels like a either go figure it out somewhere else or this won't work type of a thing. And I think that's why I say they're stuck in neutral. I don't feel like they ever make a step forward. They buy Altonori. He looks like a really good player. And then they sell Vinagre for nothing. Like they have talent and they just don't seem to ever foster it. They loan out their best players, in my opinion, and they bring back guys who just aren't Premier League quality. And I just think they don't have a goal scorer that's going to keep them anywhere near where their ambition should be, because they were on the cusp of being the side that we talked about earlier in this program in West Ham that was challenging for a top 4 spot or at least a European spot. I mean, they played in the quarterfinals of the Europa League when Nuno was there. They had a deep run because they were talented and deep and had great upcoming players. They sold them and they didn't buy properly. And they hired a manager that kind of feels Nuno light. And that doesn't work in this league, in my opinion.
Is it a matter of, I mean, I almost feel like, they had that team and, they were like, hey, we found something over here, like something is working, and they almost outdid it. Like bought too many of those like young players that might turn out. And I think, we talked about this in the past about sometimes too many changes is not necessarily good. And like you're saying, Gali, I think sometimes they've loaned out the wrong. Is it just a matter of like bad financial decisions or bad scouting decisions, Bickler, where they loaned out the guy that maybe they should have been more patient with and grown themselves? Or is it just like, they keep casting these nets out there saying, like, let's get this 20-year-old, 21-year-old, 23-year-old potential really good guys, and then not giving them enough of a patience and maybe like an environment to actually become the stars that, they're meant to be when they sign them?
Yes. I think, yeah, like, listen, Fabio Silva, that kind of money at 20 years old shouldn't be out on loan. You've committed financially to it. You're married to it. Okay. So you're in a committed relationship with that player. You keep him there. You foster that. You figure it out. He at least needs to be playing and training with the first team. Okay. Like to me, a loan makes no sense in that situation. I think the difference between this Wolves team and the last Wolves team that was great, like 3 years ago, is the fact that they just don't have an offensive identity. I sound like a broken record, but I really think it just comes down to the quality up front. Like we looked at, I mean, even when they were firing, like even when they didn't have Jota, they had they had a fully fit Jimenez that was firing on all cylinders with Potence off him as a second striker. Like they had some attacking flair and some bite to it. With Jimenez out, they just don't. I think Neto back helps them for sure. I think that helps them. I think like Neto to me is Jota 2.0. Like he's like sort of a bastardized junior version of that player. Like I think they can do similar things, but it's just to me they just don't have that firepower up front. And no matter what you put behind it in this league, if you can't score goals, you're going to be mid-table and lower.
So give me something positive over here, Gally, because it does not sound very positive so far. Give me something that a Wolves fan can say, yeah, but we got this going.
Morgan Gibbs White might play the false 9, and that's about as negative of a positive as you can have. I mean, really, when it comes down to it, you mentioned earlier, we joke about the Portuguese connections. We joke about the manager, right? We joke about loaning the wrong players out. I think their biggest issue is that they're basically run by an agent, because Jorge Mendes basically has ownership in Wolves, and he just sends his players there. But then he also decides when he doesn't want his players to be playing there anymore, like a Vinagre, and he gets them moved, and then he gets the big move to PSG after a loan out in Porto. So I just feel, to Paul's point, they make the wrong moves. They loan out the wrong players. They keep the wrong players. They need Jimenez to find his scoring boots. He needs to score 10 to 15 goals. And to Paul's point, Neto has to be their best player, in my opinion. and Podence has to create. And he has flashes where he looks like the little number 10, that every little Portuguese club wants, right? Like a guy who pulls the string, plays behind the real tall striker, and creates all the goals for everyone. They need that because when Neto was firing, I felt like they did have an offensive identity that was actually even better than when Jota was there playing in the front two. Because we all talk about their front three, but Jota really played in the front two with Jimenez when he was there. Yeah. And I think they need to get back to that with Jimenez and Wang and figuring out a way to also mix in Neto and Podence playing behind them. And if they can do that and stay healthy, it might work. But I might also learn how to speak Portuguese and might become an assistant coach.
I was just going to say, I don't think they'll do it. I don't think they'll do it, but if they could figure out a way to commit to Huang, I think he's a player. I think there's a player there. And I think he can score goals, which is something they need. They just seem to give him time. He doesn't do well. They put him in. He doesn't do well. They put him in. He does well. Then they don't play him again. It's like whenever I feel like he starts to get some traction, they don't start him the following match. I think if they can find some consistency with him, I think there's a player there for them that can score goals.
So having said that, and not finding a lot of positives, a lot of ifs, I mean, it almost sounds like we're on the same page where they're going to go as far as Jimenez can take him, at least offensively, because they do well on defense and they will not concede a lot of goals. I mean, they've given, top teams a run for their money, and having it's, one of those teams that's really tough to break down defensively. But if you're not going to be able to score goals, you're not going to get a lot of 3 points and get points in chunks. Bickler, where do you have them finishing the season?
15 through 17, I think, realistically for me. I think they're going to be in some trouble. I think they're good enough defensively to scrape out a relegation, but I think it's going to be ugly for a large portion of the year.
How about you, Gally? Give him some hope here.
Yeah. Nah, there's no hope here. It's similar. Your number one signing isn't a Portuguese kid, so which means he can't even understand the game plan. You bought an Englishman from Burnley who's got 11 career appearances. I mean, literally, that was their big buy was a center back. They lost Roman Saiz, who didn't have a great year, but he's a goal threat. He offered something different for them. He was a good defender and gave them, opportunities on set pieces going forward, could play out wide. I think they're weaker at fullbacks. I think they're weaker at center back. And as good as Connor Cody is, and I think he's a great leader, the only way they stay up is in that 16, 15 range. And that's honestly because they have one of the top 5 shot-stopping goalkeepers in the whole Premier League. And if it wasn't for Salah last year, they might have been in trouble last year at times. So I think their defense all hinges on the keeper and Cody at the heart of that defense. That'll be enough to keep them up, but it's not enough to get them anywhere near the top half of the table.
I agree. I think they will be in a battle. I don't know if it's going to get ever dangerous. I just have a lot of faith in terms of like how they play as a team where they're going to be able to consistently get at least those single points and draws to be able to stay up. But it will be a challenge for them. I was personally more than shocked with Collins's price tag of like 27 million pretty much from a team that got relegated, which is, I thought it was like shocking in terms of how much they paid for him. And I don't know why. I mean, I know he's a young talent, but like you're saying, Gally, you didn't buy a lot of experience and you're bringing him onto this team. Yeah, like I say, I don't think they will be in danger of relegation, but they will be close to that zone, hovering above it. So not a lot of, we didn't paint a great picture over here, but it's not as bad, I guess, when there's no relegation battle. But that is our preview for the Wolves.